where the world that we're living in right now makes us unhappy. Why don't we want to live in a world that makes us happy? You know, he can't understand, and again, it's vision first. And that's why he doesn't understand why you wouldn't try and solve problems.
Rule number 41, don't obsess with competition.
Companies obsess about their competitors, which is fine tactically, which is fine for short term, but long term, most companies aren't brought down by the competition they know about. They're brought down by the competition they don't know about. Some new emerging technology. You know, do you think the music business was paying attention to the computer business at all? Of course not. They were paying attention to other music companies. MySpace wasn't focused on Facebook. They didn't even know Facebook existed. But it's Facebook that brought them down or significantly hurt their business, right? In other words, if you don't even know who your competitors are, what's the point of fixating and making all of your business decisions based on competitors? All we're doing is reacting. This is why purpose matters. It gives us a North Star. Yes, we have to concern ourselves with our competition from a tactical and short-term point of view, but to make long-term strategic decisions based on a competitive set that we don't even know if it's complete, based on technology that we don't even know it's completely fully baked, is madness. It's absolutely madness, right? So you want to fixate on the path.
Rule number 42, follow your vision, not the trends.
What do leaders, of which there are many gathered here today, what do leaders need to do to understand the trends in their industry better? Because it's very easy to say, this is where this business or this is where this market is going. It's actually, that's what everyone else is doing. So how can you get ahead of a trend in the way that Steve Jobs was able to look at where the puck is going?
So trend data is very dangerous. Because all it does is report a trend. It doesn't report if it's positive or negative.
And everyone else has got it.
And everybody else has got it. So for example, you know, kids these days are all using apps to do everything. We should make more apps. But nobody says it's healthy, right? In the 1980s, you needed to do cocaine to get through the business day. You know, that's a trend. That's a trend.
Is that really true?
Cocaine usage was up in the 1980s. In businesses, if you worked in an investment bank, you'd know.
Yeah. No, I was, I was definitely not doing that in the 80s.
So the point is, it's a trend.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we should invest in it, right? So trend data is, I think, the way people rush towards a trend because they think that's where the market is going is very dangerous because it's incredibly unstable information.
But you have to, as a leader, anticipate where your market is going and make 3- and 5-year plans.
And the way you do it is with vision, right? So, for some reason, somebody keeps telling me that my publisher said this to me, that I'm good at understanding the zeitgeist. And he's wrong. I have no clue about what people are thinking. All I know is where I want to go. That's it. As I said before, I have a vision of a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired to go to work, feel safe when they're there, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day. So I can make certain guesses and predictions about things I have to do to get there.
Rule number 43, be willing to ask for help.
The biggest lesson I learned was, thank goodness I learned it pretty early on, which is, and I think a lot of business owners make this mistake, which is, because I was the boss, you know, in my own mind.
Yeah.
I thought I had to know all the answers, and if I didn't, I thought I had to pretend that I did. And that's stupid. And what I learned is that just because I may have the top position in the hierarchy, I'm not expected to know everything, and if I pretend to know everything, it diminishes the value of all the great ideas and the great intelligence around me. And when things got difficult, I would never admit it, right? I would just put on a brave face and show up every day. And the biggest lesson I learned was to say, I don't know, I don't understand, or I need help. At any level about any subject.
Yeah.
And amazingly, I was always surrounded by people who wanted to help or who knew answers, but they never offered to help or offer the answers because they didn't think I needed it because I kept pretending that I knew it all.
Right.
Not to mention the fact that nobody likes a know-it-all. So that was huge for me. And when I was willing to ask for help and accept it when it was offered and sort of accept the humility of the fact that other people know a lot more about a lot of things than I know. And I know one thing, you know, and they know lots of things. That's when things really started to move because we were now a team. Like we were actually working together.
Rule number 44, focus on the positives.
I see a lot of questions here around dealing with a negative team or dealing with a team where we feel people may not have the right intentions or the right motives. How do people work with that? The viewers are asking.
Yeah, it happens. And the answer is, don't worry about it. Like, we can't obsess about the ones that are doing something wrong. We obsess about the ones that are doing something right. Instead of criticizing the ones that are negative, we want to build up and complement the ones that are positive. Because when that's the reward structure, which is finding and identifying and rewarding good, then everybody wants to be rewarded and recognized, and so eventually the behavior comes in, as opposed to criticizing wrong. Nobody wants to be criticized, and all it does is it makes people back away and afraid. So the point is, ignore the negativity and focus on the positivity and start obsessing about the people that are doing something right. I learned this lesson the hard way. I wrote a blog, and we had somebody write in with a very aggressive sort of note to me and sort of saying I'm a hypocrite and all of this stuff. And my team got together and we discussed our response, and somebody wrote back, and he wrote back a very nasty response back, and we thought, okay, how do we react to this? And I eventually got on the phone with him and tried to talk with him, and I talked him off the shelf and talked him off the, it was okay. And about 6 months later, I wrote another blog, and he wrote another, and we got together, and it occurred to us, we were spending all of this time with one negative person. Yeah. And we were ignoring all of the people who wrote in compliments and were supporting our work. And so we literally made a decision that day that when we got results like that, we wouldn't care. And that if we were going to invest any time of our people, it was going to be to say thank you to the people who were helping us and helping compliment us and helping advance the message. And so I personally don't respond to those at all anymore, ever, but I regularly call people up to say thank you for helping advance the cause. And it feels nicer. And there's time better spent, and we're not wasting time anyway. So yeah, focus on the positive.
Rule number 45, empower individuals.
So was Steve Jobs playing the finite game because he was crushing the competition, or was he playing the infinite game because he just did his own thing?
So Jobs had a very clear vision, and it was to give the individual the power to stand up to Big Brother. He was at his heart a rebel. He grew up in Northern California during the Vietnam War, which is where the beginning of the anti-establishment revolution sort of started. Yeah. And that was his childhood. And so he really stood for the individual standing up to the man.
And he had a big spiritual side. He was a Buddhist at times.
Yeah. And if you look at the decisions he made decisions like this. He ran decisions through his vision before he got to the interests, right? So there's a very famous story of when he went to Xerox PARC. Do you know this one? So Jobs, they just come off the success of the Apple I and the Apple II. It's already a big company. He's already well known. He's already the darling of business. And their next big push is going to be into a technology they called the Lisa. That was their next computer that they were going to launch. And just as executives do, they visit each other's companies. And Jobs and a few of his colleagues went to visit Xerox PARC. And Xerox showed them a new technology that they had invented called the graphic user interface. Right? Now, remember, Jobs believed in the individual standing up to Big Brother. So the reason they made their computers beautiful was not arbitrary. It's because if they were pretty looking, you'd put them in the living room. If they're ugly, you put them in the basement. And you're more likely to use something that's in the living room than if it's in the basement, right? The reason you make them simple is because more people can then use them. And so when he saw this thing called the graphic user interface, he thought, this is a better technology. It's a leapfrog to make it easier for more individuals to access the power of the personal computer than what we have in the Lisa.
So that's an infinite game because he's thinking about what's right for the long term rather than what his competition is.
And as they left Xerox PARC, Jobs says, we have to invest in this. And his colleagues said, you're crazy. We've invested millions of dollars, millions of man hours already in the Lisa. If we do this, if we invest in this, we're going to blow up our own company. To which Jobs replied, better we should blow it up than someone else. That decision became the Macintosh. That decision was the Macintosh, of which, remember, Windows is an interface designed to copy the Macintosh. In other words, he completely changed the way computers work to the point where now any individual can easily use a computer. And he always made decisions that way. He made decisions always empowering the individual. So he was asked a question about the movie industry, cinemas, and the decline of cinemas. And he replied that the cinemas were making the same mistake, the movie industry was making the same mistake that the music industry made, which is the music industry falsely believed that their customer was Tower Records and Virgin Megastore, and not the person who actually spent money on buying the album. He says, you've confused your customer with your distribution channel.
Rule number 46, have a trusting team.
I was boarding a flight and a scene played out in front of me where one of the passengers attempted to board the plane before their group number was called. And the gate agent literally berated him. Sir, step aside, I haven't called your group. Please step aside and wait till I call your group. So I spoke up and said, why do you have to talk to us that way? Why can't you talk to us like we're human beings? And she looked me in the eye and said, if I don't follow the rules, I could get in trouble or lose my job. All she revealed to me is that she doesn't feel safe in her own company, and her leaders do not trust her to do the job for which she's been trained to do. And guess who suffers? Us and the company. The reason we love flying Southwest Airlines is because the company trusts them to do the job they've been trained to do, and they use discretion. We don't trust people to follow the rules. We trust people to know when to break them. And the problem is, in a fear-based society, people fear for their own jobs more than common sense. That was a perfect scenario of what happens when somebody in the company is too afraid to break the rule, break the policy, use discretion, find another way. You know? So almost predictable that something will happen, something will break at some point.
Rule number 47, find true joy.
How would someone know if they're doing something for their why? How do you know?
Oh, you can feel it. You feel it. Do you ever have that experience where you feel like something's wrong?
Yeah.
You know, sort of, you're like, you make a decision, but it makes you uncomfortable. You're not following through with your cause or your purpose. And you ever have a decision where everybody's like, you're crazy. You're like, this just feels like the most natural, normal thing I could do. I'm not even in doubt here. You know, right? Now, the problem with simply running on gut is it's not scalable.
Yes.
This is the reason we want to learn our why, learn to articulate and be able to speak our why so that others can understand why we're making the decisions we're making. Because the problem is, if you only trust your gut, to those around you, sometimes it does appear that we're crazy or unfocused. And so people leave us and don't help us because they think we're nuts. The minute we can articulate and speak that why with clarity that others can understand, then not only will they have context for the decisions we're making, but they'll rally to help us and even do things that we didn't even ask because they understand the higher purpose that we're trying to advance. So you just know. It's a terrible answer. But you can feel it. And this is where joy and fulfillment in our work come from, which is different from happiness. You can win a big client, get a promotion, get a raise, happy. You know, do a good job, produce something great, happy. But that feeling dissipates. It doesn't last for, it certainly doesn't last for months or years. It might last for days or weeks, right? That immensely happy feeling that we all had of that big client we won or that big promotion we got is now gone. Joy, fulfillment, which doesn't mean that we love every day, but joy and fulfillment comes from that feeling that every day our work is contributing to something bigger. And that's way more important.
Awesome.
Or at least as important.
Rule number 48, run your business by your values.
So the infinite game exists up here. The finite game exists down here, right? The infinite game includes the why, what I call our purpose, cause, or belief. It's the vision of the company. It's where we're going. It's something that we will never practically reach in our lifetimes or ever, but we will die trying. That's the point, right? It's different from a big, hairy, audacious goal, which for all practical purposes you could reach. It may be difficult, but you could reach it. This is an ideal. It's a vision of the world. So my vision, I imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired to go to work, feel safe when they're there, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day. That is my vision. Right? We will never practically get there, but we will die trying. The United States was founded with a document called the Declaration of Independence, in which the document stated, all men are created equal. Now, the United States has not achieved that, and will never achieve that. But the country is at its best when we're trying to achieve that. Civil rights, women's suffrage, gay rights, the universal education, universal healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. This is where our values exist. Our values are timeless. They do not change every year whenever we have a strategic offsite, and if they do, you have a problem. That happens in big companies. Every few years, a new CEO comes in and they have a values thing, and they change, and they change, and they change. No, your values are your values, right? And they're based on your founders, and they exist from patterns of how you operate when you are operating at your natural best. When your company is operating at its natural best, when all cylinders are firing, when you're in the flow, whatever euphemism you want to use, There is a pattern that emerges, and that pattern are your values. There's a minimum of 3, there's no more than 5. If there's more than 5, there's usually redundancy. You can find overlap, that you can find lowest common denominators, and they are intractable. These things are inherently intangible and hard to measure, right? Which is why they often get brushed aside. It's not that they don't exist, they're just hard to measure. Then down here you have the finite. It's what I call the what. It's all the tangible stuff, right? Things like our interests exist down here. Because they are tangible, they are inherently easy to see and easy to measure, like products sold, money taken in, things like that, right? Number of clients we have. The way you build an infinite business is you want to run all decisions first through your values and your cause, and then through your interests. That's how it works.
Rule number 49, have infinite goals.
I've become very, very interested in the idea of playing in games that have no finish lines, right? Some games have finish lines, right? Baseball, football, right? Getting a part is a finish line. You audition, there's a beginning, middle, and end. There's rehearsal and practice. There's showing up for the audition, and you either win or you lose, and then it's over. It's over, right? That is finite. But one's career is infinite. There's no end. It's like our lives are finite, but life is infinite. People come and people go, but life continues, right? Theater, actors come and actors go, but theater continues. It's infinite. You don't win theater. You win a part, but what happens once you get the part? The finite game is over. Now you enter the infinite game. You have to be able to convert, right? And the reason this is important, and I've seen this unfortunately so many times, from a young age, all you wanted to do was get to Broadway. And then you get to Broadway. And then what? You've devoted your entire life to one finite goal, and when you get there, the immediate response is depression. Because I spent 15 years of my life for this one thing, and I got it. And now I don't know what to do next. Like, get to Broadway again. Doesn't have the same ambition. It doesn't have the same passion. You know, that you've devoted you're from Fargo, North Dakota, and that's all you wanted to do was get out of Fargo and make it to Broadway, and you made it, right? It doesn't have the same kind of passion. And this is because these are finite goals. There's a lot of studies that have been done with athletes who have finite goals to become the greatest X in the world, right? So Andre Agassi was one of these athletes. He wanted to become the greatest tennis player that ever lived. Guess what? Everyone in his life, he would view them through, how do you help me get to that? Everything was, how does this help me get to that? Everything was a transaction to how do you help me move to there? And then you know what happens? He achieved it. He became the greatest tennis player in the world. And you know what happened immediately after? Depression. Michael Phelps set out to become the most medaled Olympian in history. Do you know what? He achieved it. Do you know what happened immediately after? Depression. They spend their whole life working for one goal. Though most will never get it, the few that do don't know what to do next because their goals were finite. Their goals were finite, right? And so there are finite components to your career, but your career should be infinite. So yes, of course you have to win the finite game. You have to get the part, but immediately when you get the part, now you convert to infinite.
And rule number 50, the last one before a very special bonus clip, is be a courageous leader.
In military, we're willing to sacrifice ourselves for the gain of others.
Right.
But in business, we're willing to sacrifice others for our own gain.
Yes.
How do you build that military mindset in companies like here or other companies?
Leadership. I mean, leadership creates an environment. And this is what I learned. The whole concept of leaders eat last and those lessons that I learned from spending time with folks in uniform, it was born out of my own experience where I was going through a point in my career as my career was growing. All of a sudden you have new friends that I didn't have before. And that's wonderful. And then I learned the hard way that they weren't my friends, they were playing me. They wanted access or a deal or something, right? And I learned it the hard way. And so I retreated. I was like, I wanted to be friends with nobody else but the people I knew way back when, which is also not a good way to live.
And yet simultaneously, I'm spending time with tons of folks in the military who, in business, we have colleagues and coworkers. In the military, you have brothers and sisters. I mean, that's a different kind of relationship. And as you know, I have hugged more people in uniform than I've ever hugged in suits. I've cried with more people in uniform than I've ever cried with in suits. I've stood in the audience and listened to officers give talks, and I've sat in the audience and cried. I've never cried with any CEO gave a speech ever, right? So there's a different nature of relationship. And my original conclusion was they're better people. That the reason you get a disproportionate amount of these kinds of behaviors is because they're better people, and better people are drawn to a life of service in the military, which is why we find a disproportionately high number of them there. And the more I started to learn, the more I realized I was completely wrong. It's the environment. It's the environment. And when the leader creates an environment in which people feel that someone has my back, they will do extraordinary things. And what I learned is that courage is not this deep down internal fortitude, right? It comes externally. It's like a trapeze artist would never try a brand new death-defying act unless they had a net. The courage didn't come from the trapeze artist. The courage came from the net. And it's the same in the military, which is especially when you're in life and death situations, when you're in theater, people who you don't like, you still rely on to save your life. And the reason it works is because you don't have to look behind your shoulder. And that mentality, and you know better than anybody, which is when you are deployed into dangerous places, nobody sort of loves deployment, but people have warm feelings towards deployment, which is really strange. And suicides rarely happen in combat situations. They usually happen back home. And it's the intensity of the relationships that create that warmth and the sort of weird enjoyment of really bad, uncomfortable, and dangerous circumstances. It's because we're human beings, and human beings as social animals feel our safest when we trust each other. And good leaders are capable of producing that. So great businesses look very much like well-run military organizations. And there's poorly run military organizations as well. But great businesses look exactly the same, where the leaders give the glory. They distribute authority. They push it down the ranks, let people make decisions. If they screw up, there's no risk of getting fired. If the company misses its arbitrary projections on its arbitrary date, we do not use the people to balance the books. We figure out other ways, or we even invite the people to help solve the problems. These are the things that produce that circle of safety that produces the exact same outcome, where people will love each other, cry for each other, sacrifice for each other. You see it in business plenty, but it always boils down to leadership.
Now, I've got a special bonus clip from Simon on how to be the best version of yourself that I think you're going to enjoy. But before that, it's time for the 3-point landing questions. You watched the video. Now let's take action. Here we go. Question number 1. What are your infinite goals? Number 2, how will you talk about your beliefs this week? And number 3, what's a new way that you could turn your why into action?
There's no such thing as winning business. There's no such thing as winning global politics. And there's definitely no such thing as winning education. But if we listen to the language of too many organizations, they don't know the game they're in. They talk about being the best. They talk about being number one. They talk about beating their competition. The problem is, there's no such thing. Let me give you a real-life example that sheds some light on what I'm talking about. I spoke at an education summit at Microsoft. I also spoke at an education summit at Apple. At the Microsoft summit, the vast majority of the executives spent the vast majority of their presentations talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with where they were going, the other one was obsessed with their competition. Guess which one was in quagmire? At the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the new Zune when it was a thing. This was Microsoft's response to the iPod. And this little piece of technology was absolutely incredible. It was beautifully designed. The user interface was intuitive and very simple to use. It was really brilliant, I have to say. So at the end of my Apple talk, I was sharing a taxi with a very senior Apple executive, employee number 54 to be exact. And I decided to stir the pot. I couldn't help myself. I turned to him and I said, you know, Microsoft gave me their new Zune, and it is so much better than your iPod Touch. To which he said, I have no doubt. And the conversation was over. Because the infinite player understands sometimes your competitor has the better product, and sometimes you have the better product. And sometimes you're ahead, and sometimes you're behind. But there's no such thing as best or first or beating your competition. There's only ahead and behind. And the reality of an infinite game is you're actually only competing against yourself. That the objective every single day is how do we become a better version of our own institution this year than we were last year? How do we improve the quality of our culture? How do we improve the quality of the way we provide the service that we claim to be providing? How do we improve ourselves? That is the main point of being an infinite game, because at the end of the day, we don't have the same metrics as everybody else, and we're not even necessarily playing to the same ends.
If you want to learn how to start with why with Simon, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll enjoy it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
I don't have a time in my life, many years ago, 10 years ago, where I had lost my passion for what I was doing. I own my own small business.